coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to the Wisdom Speaks Podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Lanico Cash. Join me here every week as I challenge our culture's very common misconceptions about faith and address the concepts of faith that have been deemed unacceptable and displeasing to God. I'm so glad you're joining me today. I want you to imagine that you've raised your children with good morals and good values and in the knowledge of Christ and in the knowledge of God even. And then they behave in ways that flat out disappoint you and break your heart. Imagine that you started a business with the hopes and the expectations that the business will thrive and do well, only for it to be over before it even really gets the chance to start. I want you to imagine that you enter into a relationship that looks and even feels pretty promising, only for it to fall apart in the end. Imagine that you apply for a position that you know very well that you are well qualified for, and you even are expecting to receive it, but only to receive a rejection letter or only to receive news that you've been looked over and picked over. I even want you to imagine that you've received a vision or a promise from God, and you know that He's been very, very clear about it. He's spoken to you, and you know you've heard this thing. You've been through hell even while in the waiting process, and yet it still has not materialized yet. Disappointment. It's tough. It's tough. It's a very difficult emotion to process. One that I believe that many of us know a thing or two about and have experience in it. See, disappointment can take on many different forms. And I want to outline some of them for you because they can be categorized in so many different ways. Disappointment I'm speaking of. It can be outcome related. So you may have entered into a situation or to a thing expecting a certain outcome, and that outcome just did not take shape. It can be person related. It can be that a person who their actions and their behaviors have disappointed and hurt you and caused you to even be leery even going forward. It can be personal or professional. You thinking that you are getting to a certain place professionally and in a career, and even setting particular goals for yourself personally that just are not taking shape or just have not taken shape. It can be romantic. Disappointment can even come from romantic relationships where people that you enter into a relationship with may not have the capacity to be what you wanted them to be. And that could be disappointing. Disappointment can also come from family. Absolutely. It can be family members. And I know a lot of times we feel and we understand that family, a lot of times the disappointments that come from family members hit a little bit different and hit a little harder because those are the people we know and love the best. And so disappointment can also come from disappointed preferences. So there may have been preferences you had for your life. I preferred to go to this school, but they didn't let me in. I preferred to live in this house, but the deal fell through. And so you could have preferences that get disappointed as well. And then lastly, here's a big one. Disappointment can also come from unrealized dreams. Dreams that you had, dreams that you hoped for, and just has not taken shape yet. I'm not speaking of the dreams that just fell through. I'm speaking of the dreams and the hopes that have not yet happened, you know that it is coming and you are very expectant of it. Yet you still get disappointed because it is not yet your time. God says it may not be time just yet. And so this can cause disappointment as well. Disappointment can happen so many different ways. And it can also make you feel all sorts of ways, a myriad ways as well. Disappointment can make you feel sad. You can have just a sad disposition because you may not realize you're dealing with something that disappointed you. It can make you feel very angry as well, frustrated even, highly irritable. You could be very irritated. You could be walking around very irritable and not even realize it is due to you being disappointed in some way. And now you're carrying that weight with you everywhere you go. Disappointment can also cause us to feel anxious. And the anxiety that comes with feeling disappointed is primarily due to feeling like you are potentially set back. And so when you feel like you are set back, then you begin to feel anxious because you aren't where you want to be or where you need to be or where you think you should be. Disappointment can also make us feel a loss of hope, right? It can make us feel like, what's the point? What's the point of continuing to do this thing? What's the point of continuing to put effort into this relationship? What's the point? It can have us feeling like, what is the point? So we can feel that loss of hope start to set in. And what it is disappointment. It can also make you feel discouraged, depressed even, and just flat out weary. Disappointment can cause all of these things and more. And it's important that we really understand. I really want us to understand disappointment today because how do I know? Ask me how I know it personally. I can speak from a personal standpoint that disappointment can truly affect your life. It can have you walking around with a disposition that makes you feel like you've lost hope. And so I really want us to understand, how do we get through that? Because when you're feeling these kinds of ways, when disappointment is beginning to set in, how in the world do we deal with that? And so I want to share with you today 4 ways. I want to deal with that. I want to share with you 4 ways that we can begin to deal more effectively with disappointment. Because again, disappointment can affect your life. It really, truly can. And so the first way in which I want to share with you that we can begin to deal effectively with disappointment is to weep. Yes, weep. Go ahead, beloved, weep. You see, God gave us the ability to feel our emotions. And that may not sound like much to people, but I'm going to say that again. God gave us the ability to feel our emotions, every single one of them, all of them. And that's a gift, if you ask me. Because otherwise we would just be walking around like robots, doing what we have to do from day to day, doing what we need to do, what needs to be done. And then that's it. But God gave us the ability to feel our emotions. And so to deny them would be to deny your own humanity. To deny them would mean to deny the very thing that makes you human. And to deny yourself the opportunity to feel would be to deny yourself the opportunity to truly know God. You would be denying yourself the opportunity to truly know God and know who He is. Isaiah 53. In Isaiah 53, Isaiah describes Jesus as a man of sorrows and well acquainted with grief. And that means that Jesus wept. Yes, He did. Jesus wept. Yes, our Messiah. He wept. He got disappointed. He was so disappointed with the people of Jerusalem. He was disappointed that his intentions and his goals and what he wanted to do for the people were not being met because of the people, obviously, but it made him disappointed. And yes, he wept. He wept in disappointment. And because Jesus wept, that ought to be an encouragement to us to weep as well. And I want to say right here that, beloved, God knows. He knows your disappointments. He knows that that outcome to that situation disappointed you so badly. He knows that that family member, their actions hurt you. He knows. God knows that that person's behaviors and their actions hurt you and disappointed you. He knows that. And he knows that that romantic relationship hurt you so and made you leery of trusting in people again and trusting even in love again. Beloved, he knows that. God knows it. And so I just wanted to put this out here because it is important that we take a moment when we get in a place of disappointment, when we find ourselves in this place. It is important for us to take a moment to weep. And so what I want you to do right now is I want you to take your moment. Take it, beloved. Take your moment to weep. And as a matter of fact, I want to take the moment with you. And so take a moment, quiet moment. It's important to have people that will sit with us and that will let us weep. And so I want to take this moment with you to weep. In Matthew 23, scripture describes to us how after Jesus wept over the disappointment he felt about the people of Jerusalem, after he wept, he got up and he set his face toward the cross and did what God called him to do. And so I just want to leave this point here with this point, that take your moment. And after you've taken your moment to weep, I want you to begin to set your face toward the cross and do what Christ called you to do. The second way in which I want to share and how we can begin to deal with disappointment is that we need to evaluate and manage our expectations. And I shared this recently in my Q&A live that I did. So if you haven't watched that, I urge you to go check that out. But on there, one of my guests asked me, how do I deal with when my prayers don't get answered? And this was my very response. I literally said, it is a constant managing of expectations that I have to do. And that I have to make sure that I'm always managing those expectations. And here's what I meant. You have to, first of all, evaluate what your expectations are. So when you find yourself in a place of disappointment, there's some questions you should begin to ask yourself. And these questions should get you to evaluate, where am I? Where exactly am I with my expectations? Did I assume that everything would be perfect? Or did I assume that I would get everything perfect the first time? Did I expect that this relationship would meet all of my emotional needs when I entered into it? Did I expect that? And did I expect my children never to disobey me? Did I expect that they would never act childishly? Or did I expect that they would fail to behave how I wanted them to? Or did I assume that my walk with Christ and my walk with God would be without any hardships, any, or pain? And these are the questions that we should begin to ask ourselves in order to evaluate where we are. And then once we have been able to get into these questions well and deal effectively with these questions and get to the answers. And yes, I know that these are hard questions to ask because they kind of call us out, right? Did we assume that everything would be perfect? So that's kind of like a calling out. So I know that these are difficult questions to answer, but beloved, when you find yourself in a place of disappointment, you have to understand how to evaluate where you are so that you can begin to manage them. Because once you've worked through questions such as these and other questions that kind of get at the root of where you thought you were and where you are, then you can begin to manage them. Because then once you've answered these hard questions, you can begin to manage them by saying things like, okay, well, maybe I should make my goal progress instead of perfection. Or maybe I should root and ground myself in Christ and in God so that when I enter into a relationship, I don't have to put the burden and put that much stress and pressure on another person to provide and to meet all of those emotional needs that I may have. Maybe I should do my work with God first, and then I can do that. I can expect less. And maybe I need to give my children a little bit more time to mature and to grow, right? And so these are the things, this is how you begin to manage your expectations. Give yourself grace. Because here's the thing, Jesus was very frank with his disciples when he said that you will have suffering in this world. And that is scripture. You will have suffering in this world. And so when you're walking with Christ and when you are on this journey of life, you got to understand that you're going to have hardships. And so in order to manage your expectations well, you have to know that, and you have to sit in that well, that there will be suffering in this world. But Jesus also said this, he followed up with this, that take heart because I have overcome the world. That's what he follows that with. You will have suffering in this world, but take heart because I've already overcome the world. And so that can begin to be our encouragement, that if somebody overcame this world for us and we know that there is nothing new under the sun, then that could be our encouragement to get up. That could be our encouragement to keep going. And so I want you to be encouraged and manage your expectations well. So the third way that I want to share with you that we can begin to deal more effectively with disappointment. And this is my favorite one to share when I'm teaching this to someone. This is my favorite thing to share about disappointment, about the point of disappointment. Bring your disappointments to God. That's right. Bring them. Come one, come all. Bring them. Bring every single disappointment you have. Bring them to God. So here's what I encourage you. I want to encourage you to do this. I encourage you to get pen and paper. And once you've gotten some pen and paper, I want you to begin to list and write down everything, every disappointment you are dealing with, every disappointment you find yourself perplexed by. I want you to write it down. And listen, don't leave anything out. Nothing. Don't leave anything out. Get before God then. Once you're able to write down all of the things and list them out one by one, then I want you to get before God in your quiet space. If that's prayer for you, if that's meditation, devotion, however, but get before God in your quiet space. And I want you to read off that list. That's right. And don't run away from God, because the tendency here is to run away and to try to keep it cute and to try to keep it respectful, or what you think is respectful. But listen, beloved, God can handle this. And so I want you to read that list off and read it off proudly, as if you're reading a speech before a group of people. And don't run away from God when you're doing this. Be honest, be real, be authentic, be truthful. And so here is where I get this idea from to do this when I'm sharing this with people. Here's where I get this idea to do that from. I love the book of Psalm in the Bible. The Psalms are just beautiful. I mean, they are beautiful demonstrations of how to do what I'm just exactly what I'm saying here. And so I want to give you, I want to read one of the Psalms for you as an example so that you can see what I'm saying and see what I mean when I am, and how this point is displayed and justified. And so I want to read to you Psalm 42. And I'm not going to read the entire thing. I just want to highlight, though, some points in it. And so Psalm 42 reads this way. It says, "As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for my God, for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. My tears have been food day and night, while people say to me all day long, 'Where's your God? Where's your God?' Why, my soul, are you so downcast? Why so disturbed within me? My soul is downcast within me. Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why must I go on, God, mourning, oppressed by the enemy? My bones, God, suffer. They suffer mortal agony as my foes taunt me, continuously saying to me all day long, 'Where is your God?'" And so this is what it means to bring your disappointments to God. And I hope you hear that. I hope you hear that in God's word, that it is okay to bring your disappointments to God because He wants to hear about them. He knows, beloved. He knows that you have been disappointed. And so be encouraged, beloved. Be encouraged to bring your disappointments to God so that He can help you to deal with those disappointments. So, lastly, the fourth way in which I want to share with you that we can begin to deal effectively with disappointment is to surrender. Surrender. Yes. Surrender your desires. Surrender your expectations. Surrender your thoughts on the matter, whatever the matter may be. And what does it mean to surrender? It just simply means to cease resistance. That's right. Just cease resistance. And so recently I was in conversation with my mother. And listen, and this was just this week. This just happened just this week. And listen, when I'm in conversation with my mother, it can get pretty intellectual. We can get very intellectual where we're pulling in status. We're pulling in stats and all sorts of things and studies. And so talking with her helped me to remind myself that there have been studies that have shown that when a person is taking a fall, and I literally mean a physical fall, like tripping over something and taking a fall to the ground. So studies have shown that when a person is taking a physical fall, by letting your body fall, you actually will fare better in the fall, right? So it is when you resist the fall. So it's when you clench up and when you try to control the fall, you actually stand a very high chance of breaking a body part. Interesting. So what that says to us is that by giving in to the fall, you are actually in essence trusting your body to do what it was meant to do, and that is to protect you. Mm. And if that was not the biggest revelation that I received this week. And so listen, this is encouragement. What am I saying here? What am I saying? So I'm saying that by surrendering, ceasing resistance, and learning to just trust God, what you're doing is you're falling into trust with God. And you're trusting God to do what God is supposed to do and what He is meaning to do for you. And that is to protect you. And that is also to bless you. And so when we begin to surrender whatever expectations we have, when we begin to surrender whatever desires we have, and when we begin to surrender all of our thoughts on the matter, then we begin to submit our ways to God. And when we submit our ways to Him, that is showing Him that, God, I trust you. Because, beloved, trust me, He knows. He knows. And so that is my prayer for you today. I pray that you will allow yourself to weep. I pray that you will honor your feelings and let God honor your feelings as well by bringing them to Him. I pray that you will begin to learn to evaluate and manage your disappointments so that you can see where you are versus where you will soon be. And I pray that you will begin to surrender and trust God, cease to resist, so that you can fall into God's arms the way He wants to protect and love you and give you what you need. And so I pray that this message has blessed you. And if it did, I want you to consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It really is helpful to grow and to recommend the channel to other people who may need these words of advice and words of wisdom. I also want to encourage you here to join my Patreon. I'm doing something very special. God is doing something very special with that Patreon and with the group there. And so I want to encourage you, and I want to just offer to you the opportunity to come over to Patreon to become a paid member. And when you become a paid member, you can then participate in my spiritual support group, where we are trying to hold each other accountable and we are following God's lead there. And so I want you to come over and be just as excited as I am and join my Patreon, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the videos, and leave comments. Let me know if this information is helpful to you. And so I pray that you enjoy the rest of your week. And until next time, you guys, that's it. And that ends this hour of the Wisdom Speaks podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and to leave me a review on our Facebook page, as well as share this episode with a friend. You may reach me with any questions or comments at thewisdomspeakspodcast@gmail.com. Connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and on YouTube. If you would like to support this podcast, which would be very much appreciated, you can certainly do so by way of my website, CashApp, Venmo, or by becoming a member of my Patreon, all searchable under the Wisdom Speaks podcast. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a great week.